Alexandra Joy Smith, welcome to the Self-Help Antidote.
Well, I feel welcomed. I'm absolutely full of joy to be with one of my favorite human beings on the planet, Bobby Cappuccio.
Thank you. You should feel welcome because I'm really excited about talking to you. It's like, I know this is a really horrible thing to say at the beginning of a podcast, but not even because of the podcast. So listeners, that doesn't mean we don't appreciate you. We appreciate you immensely, but a little bit of background on that statement. Our guest today, I've known her for it just seems like forever. Yeah.
Had a couple years.
It just never had a start or a finish. So actually, if you rewind into our lives back to the earlier part of this century, probably around 2000, maybe 2001-ish, we ran into each other, and I was working as the director of professional development for the National Academy of Sports Medicine. What was your official title at TSI? I don't remember.
I was I was in the C-suite. I was director of training and development. Which at that point we were probably, when you came on, was probably between 125 and 140 clubs, I think, health clubs.
And I think it was 132 actually, because I remember that from Foundation.
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right. And I had started with that organization when there were 7 clubs. So I was part of, that entire quantum expansion of the industry, let alone one corporate company that ended up being the 3rd biggest, I think, in the world, 2nd biggest in the United States. So I was just honored and privileged to be part of. I always felt like what I was really doing with the 5,000 personal trainers and group exercise instructors that we had on staff. I was actually educating them to be transformers of people's lives. It showed up, and you were one of those people who taught education. And you actually were one of the only people, which is why I remember we brought you on board, to teach them as your language would be, the intrinsic and extrinsic motivational parts of adhering to exercise, weight loss, everything. But for me, it was always about teaching the transformers to transform.
Hold on to that for 1 second. I'm just going to back up. So for those of you who are thinking, okay, they're obviously talking about a health club chain, trainers. What's a TSI? Okay, so TSI was a United States-based organization. And if you are living in the US, if you're not, this is not relevant. Anytime you were in the Northeast part of the United States, if there was a city with the name Sports Club attached to it, that was Town Sports International. So it was New York Sports Club, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington. So all the sports clubs, that was TSI. So that's what we're talking about. And I think where we're about to go is heading into the journey of fitness based on what it is versus what it does. So I know Alexandra very well for many years, your family, your husband, I've worked with him extensively. And the point of commonality, the intersection between all 3 of us, is we understood for some people, fitness is life. It's a major part of their life, their identity. For other people, what they love resides outside of the 4 walls of the quote unquote gym. And it was a tool, it was a vehicle for one aspect of deeper transformation. So just to set the stage.
And that was our language. They didn't know that. They were just there to sweat or get a sweat on, or to feel better about themselves in the moment, right? But yes, ultimately, that's what I was pointing to, is that I was the director of training and development, which was one of the first roles like that in the country, in the health club environment. There wasn't that much commitment to how trainers and instructors were actually trained in multi-purpose facilities. They would come in with certifications and they would get hired. But it was a really incredible time, because we created a lot of infrastructure to actually take trainers and instructors from not being trainers and instructors to actually being, skilled deliverers of fitness, whether they were group or one-on-one, as well as I'm going to go back and say, transformers of people's lives. So it was an exciting time for the industry. It was an exciting time to be working for a company where I could even have that role. It was awesome. I loved it.
This is kind of interesting, because when you just said, I just realized something, and I may have just realized it for the first time. In the 1990s, there was education, but right around
98, 99.
Late 1990s, early part of the 21st century, it was almost this global move to start educating and developing trainers, and not to go in this direction. Well, I'm sure we're going to go in a lot of interesting directions, but Rupert Sheldrake, where he talks about morphogenic fields, where there's this field of information and people seem to tap into it at the same time. So someone's creating the first automobile, over in Europe. At the same time, Henry Ford is creating the prototype for what's going to become the Model T. That was kind of happening in the health and fitness industry. And a lot of health club chains that didn't really have a chance to talk or interact with each other, they were quite serious about it. I just want to get your take. What do you think created that? I know there were some business implications, obviously, to having training scalable and duplicatable throughout your organization.
Well, I do want to just make sure we bookmark and highlight the morphogenic field and what Sheldrake really meant by that, being used as an analogy for this, because that's a really interesting conversation to have later. So let's bookmark that. So what this is a good segue, Bobby, to who I am and what I stand for now. So what I have been a part of, and you were a part of, which is why I'm so certain, and as much as you can be certain about anything, because really the only thing to be certain about is that there is no certainty, as we know. I was a part of an industry that wasn't an industry, and we all had this, it's like fire in our belly, because exercise felt so good and we wanted to share that with others. And I think what was occurring on the planet from there's something called spiral dynamics. You may know about that as like a value system structure, something I teach, but let's just shelve that for a second. But I think what was happening on the planet is a shift from so much head, mind, to a need to feel more embodied in the body. And then you had all the evidence from science, from medical research, and people dying of heart attacks and all the things that were to validate why exercise was important. But when we all started, and we were all very young, of course, we're young at heart as well now, but literally on our timelines, we were very young, and we all had a fire in our belly about this industry. We didn't even know what we were doing. We had no idea.
I didn't have any idea that I had no idea what I was doing, but in retrospect, I had no idea what I was doing.
Exactly. And we felt like this draw, this pull towards creating something together. And we all came together because it just felt so darn good to exercise. I mean, to work out. Like it was pretty freaking simple. But then all of a sudden, models and structures got formulated around the business community where it made sense to, clear a squash court and make it an aerobics studio. And it was really, to almost follow an evolutionary model kind of explanation, is like, we were really wiring and firing neurologically and biologically in ourselves what felt good. And then the business minds came in and said, oh, well, there's enough people jumping around on that floor, remember Nautilus, the blue equipment was the first set of, selectorized equipment.
God, yeah. Arthur Jones, he made exercise so accessible to people.
So it was the squash court that was the aerobic studio. And then the squash court next to that, a blue selectorized piece of equipment called Nautilus was put in. And that became that became health clubs. And then, you build it, people will come. And it just became a movement because it felt good. It felt good in the body. It didn't necessarily become a business, an operable, successful business model until later. So my segue is, that is what I see for the coaching industry. That is what I see from where fitness kind of became, and we can get into this or, or not, but like fitness became almost like hit a bumper as an industry where at least that was fulfilling for me to be part of anymore. Because what I saw was, yeah, you can have a great body and you can feel good from that, but there's more. There's more as biological humans, as the French philosopher who Teilhard, who says we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. I actually stand for iteration. I'm going to be as arrogant and bold iteration of that quote and to say that we're actually spiritual beings having a spiritual experience. This entire our existence is spiritual, and it's heaven on earth if you can actually shift into filtering the good, the bad, the bliss, the ugly, all of it as heaven on earth, including the great stuff and the not so great stuff, especially speaking over this last few years of what's occurred on our planet. So we all got to a point where it was like, there's more about, how to create feeling good in someone's body that goes beyond the gym walls, that goes beyond even, that's why yoga arose as quickly as it did as an industry with, who would have thought, I remember speaking to many of the health club leaders at the time, early 90s, about yoga studios or boutique fitness. And they're like, boutique fitness, that's over. There's never, no one can afford rents and da, da, da. And then like 10 years later, you had a yoga studio and someone who's passionate about spirit and body and the integration and, bringing in thousands of years of what was an ancient tradition, bringing it into a brick and mortar, where in the fitness industry, they would have said that could have never happened. I'm talking about the leaders.
I think a lot of opinions are reflexive, and that's not meant to be a negative or critical statement. It's just that sometimes we have certain images and our identity is wrapped up into certain groups or an affinity that we have for someone or something. So,
or a business model is based in something or something. So
that's a very fair point.
And it wasn't until the the early adopters, innovators came in, and I would call you one, where you started actually shaping what almost like the industry, Bobby, like you started speaking into there's more, like there's more going on in the psyche than just working out to create feeling good.
And I just want to go back to something that you said a couple of times about spirituality and a spiritual being. What does it mean to be a spiritual being?
Good question, because I was going way off on a tangent around the industry. Well, I think I'll point to what I said, which is when you are fully here in your body, recognizing that there isn't a place to go to, like once you're not here, but when you're fully here in your body, in your life, experiencing heaven as earth, and that every moment is an opportunity to bring spirit through. And how people do that, I'm certainly no judge and jury. The Buddhists figured this out a long time ago in terms of language, kindness, compassion, presence, to be spiritual and to embody principles that have been talked about in other ideologies for thousands of years, yoga included. It's really to be with life as the precious gift it is. That's my definition.
So would you say, because when I'm listening to them, I'm going, what's the one word? What's the link in all of that? Would you say that spirituality is about being connected connected to the present moment, connected to one another, connected to what's resonant inside ourselves. Is that a fair statement?
Very, if you wanted to reduce it down like that, but it's kind of like putting a butterfly into a box. Like, good luck with trying to reduce it down to one word ultimately, because it morphs. And the ultimate connection, there is not one spiritual ideology. There's not one book of spiritual ideology or religious doctrine that doesn't actually acknowledge that, when you acknowledge a higher power, I mean, look at the 12 steps. What's the first step? Higher power. That when you're connected, as you using your word, to the fact that there is a connection to have with something other than just this physical being, that there's actually a connection to what's possible is a connection to that which is whatever you're going to call it. I got no
meaningful,
and it's greater than you.
See,
let's get back to the morphogenic field. What Sheldrick was actually saying is that there's a level of consciousness. There's an imprint that is available that actually has the fig tree become the fig tree, the fig seed or the acorn seed become the acorn tree, not the rose bush. So that's what the morphogenic field really is. It's levels of consciousness, and there's a level of consciousness that is greater than us that creates existence. Whether you're the rose bush, whether it's Bobby Capuccio or Alexandra Joy, whether it's my cat my cat's shine and shadow, like there's a level of consciousness, an imprint that pulls you into existence.
James Hillman in the Soul's Code talks about that. I was
Yes.
fascinated by that book. I just asked because everybody has this meaning, this thing about what spirituality is. And lately I'm fixated on the word axis. So I might think, okay, well, spirituality. You see that's exactly what we're talking about.
That's
right
the field.
There. Yeah.
That's the field at work. Yes.
Because if somebody's into yoga, like, oh, well, that's my spirituality. If someone has a religion, well, that's my spirituality. But how do we all access spirituality from where we are? Because we don't all approach it the same way, but it might have the same roots and the same significance, even though how we engage in it might be a little bit different.
Well, I can simplify it in the way that I do with my goddesses. That's what I refer to as the women I am privileged and honored to share this body of play, I call it, not work, with. If you breathe, you're spiritual. So what is the one thing that we have that if we didn't have, we would not be here in this form? And what is the one thing that we all do to live, to exist?
We all breathe.
We all breathe. You got to breathe. So in with my mentors and all that I've studied and practiced and been on mountaintops and in workshops for 40 years, it boils down to one thing, is that breath is spirit. And when you are in breath, bringing breath through the body, has you be a spiritual being, because that is spirit moving through you. And whether this is like a more of a bioenergetic science medicine view of it, but as breath, as spirit moves through us, it actually hits, if you know anything about the energy systems or chakras, it actually hits the earth below our feet, which is an energy center, and then shoots back up into us as life force. So spirit is who we are because it's the vital force that creates us. It is breath. That's why, so many people in the shelf help, that's what I call sometimes the spiritual world, the transformational world, talk about breath being everything, because breath brings us back to presence. Breath brings us back to connection. Breath is spirit here. Breath is the spirit here having a human experience. I hope that translated.
It sparked my curiosity about something that you had said earlier. So we were talking about, oh, nobody really knew what we were doing, but we kind of knew, but we kind of didn't know, but we were so excited. It wasn't just about exercise. It was being part of a mass movement that
Yep.
not only engaged us in what we found inspirational, but it was purposeful in what inspired us, allowed us to contribute to other people in a way that
Exactly.
infected them and made them inspired, but it was messy. It's always messy.
So sexy, messy.
That's yes, exactly. Sexy, messy. I love that space where transformation is beginning to occur. And then it kind of stabilized for a while. And now that messiness is back. We're in another phase of transformation. I think in some ways the fitness industry has gone, I don't mean backwards in a bad way, not a good way either, but it's extreme physicality. And
Yes.
then in other ways, there's things that are branching off from fitness, and there are words and languaging around the well-being or wellness industry. That I guess that's a more encompassing umbrella term. What do you think is happening? Where are we
Well,
going right now?
great question. And I actually would invert it, if you wouldn't mind, in terms of my interpretation. I would invert it that, because what did you say? You said so many things branched off from fitness. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I would say that so many things branched off from spirituality. Fitness was one. I think the context was, and you look at the 8 limbs, you study yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, like the physicality component is just one limb. But then you have pranayama, you have breath work, you have practicing saucha, how saucha, I always say that incorrectly, but how you are in your environment. You have 6 other Sanskrit terms for actually what it is to be a fully integrated human being. So what I was trying to point to earlier, which you just also pointed to, is that the body and physicality, like yoga asana movement, is just one of the limbs of what yoga is actually an entire system for existence. And it's got 8 limbs to it. All those limbs are what actually are poking through now, not to overuse that analogy, to become, for us to become more integrated. Are we kind? Do we practice, are our environments, I very much a proponent for my haven to be my temple. Is my body my temple? Is my haven is my home? Do we treat our existence, that's what Zen, a lot of Zen Buddhism based in, is like, how do we be with every moment? How do we be with our bites of food? Not just shoveling food down, like every opportunity to be in a spiritual practice. But you don't have to use that word, because that has become something that people rail against, especially the people who like railing against things. Like to rail against spirituality now. Well,
it seems about 90% of us are railing against something.
That's just kind of the addiction. Why is that the case? Well, you and I both know, because we are one of the cosmic laws I guide in is we are energy seeking missiles, beings. So wherever we get the most energy is where we go. Railing against something provides chemistry in the body that not railing against, maybe being in apathy or inaction, doesn't provide. So railing actually is like a massive endorphin, adrenaline, dopamine addictive pathway to get energy. So when I look at the news or whatever it is and watch the railing, I'm like, oh, well, that person obviously needs some energy, because they're not getting it from other useful. By the way, I'm not saying railing against is not useful. I'm just saying it's a little stressful in the system if you live a life of railing against to get your energy source.
Eric Hoffer called them, I think it was the disappointed hopeful, where there's disappointment with some aspect of life or life in general, but they're still hopeful that things in the future can be better. Like when someone's completely hopeless, they're in a state of withdrawal. They're not railing against anything.
Yeah, I'll have to find out more about him, because that's a new distinction. His name is a new distinction for me. But if you, and I know you probably teach this as well. If you look at Hawkins' map of, levels of consciousness, he actually was someone who tested emotional frequency and vibration. And if you look at anger, it actually is a higher state and frequency above apathy. It's above boredom. It's above, feeling blah, or feeling devastated. So actually being angry is a higher state of being than being apathetic.
Well,
so,
yeah.
and go ahead.
So just from a biological perspective, I don't really teach like Hawkins. It's like, I'm not smart enough to even dive into Hawkins, but when you look at anger, when someone's in a state of anger, the activity is higher within their left prefrontal cortex. Where
Correct.
Someone has the state of fear or despondency or sadness, it's in the right prefrontal cortex. Now, here's why that is significant, because the left frontal lobes are engaged in action. So their action, there's a greater provocation for action. So anger is an approach emotion. It might not feel good. It might be toxic. It might have physiological consequences when you're in a state of chronic anger. But if you're in a state of helplessness or you're afraid, anger not only gives you a locus of control, but it also puts you into action to move away from that state.
Right. Which then, we could, you and I would say we one of our core values, we love the scholarship. We love spiritual scholarship and transformational scholarship. So you and I could we could really probably have 3 days worth of unpacking this. And
I'm just very curious and fascinated by it.
Well, and you're also incredibly scholarly with how you approach this, and so am I. I think that's why we've always loved each other. Yeah, well, mine too.
Glasses.
So just to add, there is, when you are, because I also am passionate about teaching or guiding to understand that there are levels of consciousness that you move through in a lifetime. Now, you may never get to the higher vibed frequency, intuitive, creative. You may live an entire life in reaction, but the way that layers to what you're saying is the lowest state of consciousness. And this is something that Deepak teaches, and I'm just, been a student of levels of consciousness, is when you're in fight or flight, as you know, you're in your amygdala. So you basically, any higher thought, your cortex, everything is shut off. You're in below reactive, you're in fight or flight. And, we know the system does that for survival reasons. But the deer who goes into fight or flight has the ability to not stay there. They
that's
get to
a very important distinction.
And the quote unquote opportunity we're in is to recognize that to stay in anger or to stay in railing, to use your word, or to stay in fight or flight or reactive, the amount of stress that creates in a system over time is fertile soil for dis-ease. So enter the fitness industry years ago. It was a solution for that. It was a solution for switching someone out of fight or flight, which involves, all back to the map of consciousness, all those lower states of consciousness, frequency emotions, lower frequency emotions, and and what I loved about fitness is that, and I, got a psychology degree at the time, really my only pathway was to go into clinical psychology after that, in order to become a therapist. And I wasn't interested because I did not, somewhere in me, subconsciously, I was like, the thought of sitting all day talking about someone's story over and over again, as if that was going to support them. Like fitness for me was like a quantum endorphin shift. If you got them to a certain state, and in my case, it was jumping up and down with leg warmers, with music, which wasn't great for my hips or my back or their hips or back, but who you get after an hour, oh my goddess, like someone forgot that they even were whatever before they walked into that class. That's what I loved about being a provider of that service, that product, that program called fitness. Now my intention is to be and create and be that in my sessions with women, because I work with women, create that state shift where we can impact their levels of consciousness in such a way that they can have that immediate transformation, like literally an endorphin shift because of how deeply we go in. Does that translate? So I've taken what I loved about fitness into what I love about sacred, quote unquote, guiding. I call it guiding because I have created something that's not that evolved from coaching. I was a coach way back when. I feel like it's an overused term with not a lot of
definition or
or
rigor.
guidelines,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
it's
Yeah.
kind of, it's like, I'm like, I go through a divorce. I get to be I'm living. I get to like declare I'm a divorce coach on
No,
Instagram.
I agree with you. The ICF
I've
agrees with
lost
you.
10 pounds. I get to be like a health coach, whatever. So I don't like to spend my precious life force railing against, but why I've created guiding as a distinction in as a tool or as a way of bringing forth, I guess, a new way of transforming people's lives is I don't believe anybody needs me. I believe everybody is whole and complete. I also
spoken like a coach.
I also don't believe that someone needs me across from them, yelling at them, telling them, there's the scoreboard, what's the score? What's your goal? For me, guiding is a very shoulder to shoulder energy where, I have just been on the path, maybe 4 times, 8 times, 10 times, up that slope, that mountain a few times more. So they're whole and complete. They just may not know where, to step in that particular moment.
Yeah,
so I'm only 3
so
or 4
you're
steps
doing
ahead.
what any really good guide does. One, it helps somebody, who can't see themselves going the distance, go just as far as they can see, because when you get to that vantage point, you can see further.
Correct.
It's lending your guidance to their expertise about themselves and extracting that out of them.
And having them, and then the other piece of guiding is embodiment. Now, what do I mean by that? So I did 40 years worth of intellectual scholarly study. So I am certified by blah, 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 psychology degree, like I have, a list and of hours and money spent. But I'm a slow learner. I don't slow embodier, but like it took me at year 38 of my study or my, play in the world and workshops and all that to realize that I had it all in my head, but it wasn't in my body yet. And meanwhile, this is from a fitness professional who'd been doing yoga for 20 years. And I just was like, I was in one particular mentorship. I was working with a teacher and it just hit me. I just was goddess smacked. I was like, wow, I'm the most in my head person I know. I am so like, I'm NLP, all this stuff, but it's so methodology oriented and so in my head, like, have I really brought this through my body, breath work included? And it was a pretty like on my knees, as in my, I have my altar, my sacred altar. It's my divine feminine sacred altar behind me. And I have my Kuan Yin and Green Tara, and to remind me who are on their knees. It's really interesting that most statues that show what it is to be of the divine are actually on their knees. Like I had to drop to my knees in the recognition that I didn't know ship. In fact, everything that I knew wasn't embodied, and Bobby, it wasn't.
You didn't know ship?
Yeah, I didn't know ship. Replace that P with the T. But like I wasn't, and I had a great life. And from anybody looking at my life, it wasn't, it was me who was in this moment of surrender and prayer and shock that I wasn't embodied in the principles. I wasn't living embodied inside of everything that I learned. So guiding came from such a wound, such a breakdown of realizing I was full of ship, replace the P with the T. And I mean, that moment, and it wasn't that long ago, it was pre-COVID, where that's when everything really shifted again for me. And
So
my spiritual practice wasn't an option. It was devotion. My spiritual
not an
practice.
option. It was devotion.
Yeah.
Something's coming up for me. So, as I'm listening to your journey, and you talk about psychology and how that wasn't exactly your path. And, people go
Well, it
into,
was, because I did it,
okay.
but it wasn't embodied.
Okay. So when you say embodied, just briefly, what does that mean to have something embodied versus simply a goal that you're aiming for? Because I think that might be an important
Yeah,
distinction.
because in guiding, we don't have goals. We have intentions, because intentions have a frequency related to them, and you can actually feel them and experience them in your body. So embodied is in the body, and you get really interested in the groups of sensations that show up as the information field in your body. And, as the book, and I forget who wrote it, but, the body always keeps the score, the book on trauma.
Mm-hmm. Robert Scar.
Yeah. So it's true. The body always keeps the score. So
no, that's the body bears the burden. I'm sorry. I misquoted.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I had this, because I can't arrogantly at this point talk about anything that I don't go through myself and embody myself. So I mean, in the body, and the coding of information that your body keeps. We all know, well, most of your listeners know, that 95% of what runs our life is our subconscious. 5% is conscious. So our goals are conscious. What happens in relation to those goals is in the subconscious. And a lot of times it's misaligned. And that's because goals come from the head. I'm not saying there's not people who teach this another way. Okay. But generally, goals come from the head. They come from good ideas. They come from, quote unquote, an identity, which is based in 0 to 6 years old conditioning, which is all based in wounds and reactions. So I want money because my parents didn't have any. I want a nice car because my car sucked when I was 4 years old. Or I want a great relationship because my parents, all pushing away or pushing against.
It's a reaction to our voids.
Correct. And again, that would be in the reactive state of consciousness. When you get really interested in dropping in and through, using the breath as the tool to experience what is happening in the body, you become the almost explorer of your existence through your body being an integrated tool, not something to manhandle or woman handle into shape, but something to inform every single moment of your existence. Now, I'm not saying that gives you allowance to be like, oh, I'm sad today. I don't want to do anything. Well, first of all, saying the word sad means you're already up inside your head. Sad is a description for what?
A feeling.
Right. And a feeling is a description word for a group of sensations in your body. So when I have a woman drop in, okay, you're sad. Okay, got it. But in the old model, the therapeutic model, the way that it gets wired and fired to keep telling your story that keeps it in place is, okay, so let's just do this right now. So Bobby, how do you answer the question? Sad, but okay. So how are you feeling today?
Sad.
Okay. Why?
Well, because
Okay. And then fill in the blank because my
No,
girlfriend.
I see where you're going with that. Now,
wiring and firing.
There is a benefit to identifying, well, because very rarely, I mean, there's grades of sad, and very rarely do I feel just sad or just afraid. You know, what I might be feeling is disconnected. I might be feeling loneliness, and getting really clear on what's going on does have a benefit to reduce that sensation. But I think what you're saying is don't get stuck in that story.
And that comes from the paradigm of naming it. So when you can name it, now look, that is definitely a bridge from reactive state of consciousness to mindful awareness or restful awareness, going back to those levels of consciousness. Most people, we're in a time for the most part where we're pretty much out of fight or flight. We're not cavemen or cave women. We're in reactive. You know, things go well, we feel good. Things go badly or not the way we want, we feel bad. Reactive, push against, pull, happy, sad. You know, it's the polarity. There's enough people now awakening in the bridge, moving towards restful awareness, which is the whole mindfulness movement. That's really just a way just to be in the breath, present. So mindful, restful awareness definitely has its benefits in the body. Yet here's the the next step or something. The next bridge is when you say I'm sad, and I actually ask you, so Bobby, where are you feeling sad in your body? And most people will say, what do you think most people say?
My heart.
Well, yeah, if you're at the level that you're at. Most people say, well, I feel sad up here, because it's still, they'll put their hands around their head because it's still a heady thing. But then when I'm guiding into, okay, so now where would you actually close your eyes, drop into your breath. Now bring those sensations down into the body. Where are you feeling? Then they might say heart. And if I were to cut your heart open, would I find sad?
No, I mean, you know, I wouldn't want to test this, but no.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. So there's no sad in your body. But what there are a group of sensations that, by the way, if I cut you open, I might not find either, but you can actually experience sensations in your body that aren't labeled. But what you can do is bring through, you know, a group of descriptions, like, is it hot? Is it cold? Is it are they moving fast? And when you have people get present with their breath to a group of sensations, it's like, I have experienced it as one of the most freeing, quote unquote, techniques for someone ultimately. And then you have them become the practitioners of that, where they're more interested in the sensations than the label. They can transmute. You can transmute sensations. You can reframe a story, but you still got the story. Sorry, now I'll shut up.
No, there's something I want you to talk about as we're coming to the end of the hour.
Oh yeah, we really,
yeah.
Sorry if I took us off to
no, that's fine. It's just something has come up on this podcast a few times, and you're connected to it, and it's originating intention.
Yes.
Would you mind talking about originating intention from your perspective? Because Mark, your husband, is the one who introduced it to me, and it reframed a lot of my ideas around being and existence and the space we hold for others. It also creates a compass for me sometimes that allows me to navigate through the many storms of life.
I remember you telling me yours, but can you tell me yours again?
Well, mine evolved a little bit from
as they do.
And it is, you will be free to play. Play is sacred to me, and come alive in the appreciation of beauty, which when I went through the Seligman survey with values and action, appreciation of beauty was my number one highest value. And that doesn't change. I could take that test like a year apart, and things kind of shift a bit, as they do and as they should. But that's a constant for me.
That's interesting. I didn't know, I forgot about that one, or I didn't know that one for you, because that would be a constant for me as well, for sure. Definitely highest value for me, one of in my hierarchy. So this actually relates to sensations in your body conversation, empowering you to have more access to really creating the kind of transformation and transmutation you're looking for in your life when you come to a guide and or coach. So it actually all relates. But it's a bit my model of the world that is beyond originating intent. So I just want to make sure you keep me on track for your listeners. And it's not something to believe. It's more like something to try on. So in that model of originating intent, you come into this iteration of self, and then you have your wounds and everything that occurs in the conditioning, in your conditioning 0 to 6, and your telos, your reason for being arises, your ultimate purpose, your originating intent, right? So I would say, yes, that is part of the story, but I think there's a bigger story. I don't, beyond think, it's in my body. I've embodied a greater context from cosmic law, which is actually that it's your soul's originating intent. So, and I'm not the only teacher or guide who speaks about it this way at all. Like, there's a group of us who speak about our soul's originating intent, and that is your soul, which is basically, just think of your soul as in the multidimensionality that we are, that your soul is just energy. Your soul iterates into this self that you are in this lifetime as Bobby, as Alexandra, and it leaves the body when you're ready to transition and still exists as energy. So like, you come in and then you leave, but it's all the essence of who your soul is. In my model of existence, or in this model existence, which I have found to be one of the most empowering, is your soul chooses its quote unquote originating intent, its purpose, based on how it did in this lifetime. So it's kind of like the energy that you leave with. And by the way, I'm also a channel. So like, I vesseled this. This isn't just like, I'm not just like speaking this because other people told me. Like, my spiritual meditative practices for me are like plant medicine. I've never done plant medicine, but it's as close as I've gotten. And this has come through me.
So your definition of originating intention is
from a soul level.
It's not a construct. It's something that is in you, and there's discovery involved.
Well, it's actually, you are of it.
Okay.
Your identity is of your soul's intention, and you came to complete something from the energy that didn't get complete from, let's just call it other lifetimes, whether you believe in past lives, but in other energy experiences. So you leave, you look back at the experience on the way towards, the white light, and this is also accounted from people like Anita, she wrote Dying to Be Me, but in what's the acronym for when you have near death, NDEs, near death?
Yeah. Okay.
Many of this purport, and much research has been done on, and this is what they say. Like, they have an experience of actually looking from soul at how they did. And actually, what the truth is, they look from the other people's eyes on how they did, not their own.
That's terrifying.
So, it is terrifying. It's like, that's why it's Earth School. That is why it's Earth School. So you actually leave coded on that journey out with that information. And then you iterate and make choices in that dimension, call it the soul level, where I call it the crystal cave, where you have a little meeting in the crystal cave. And the reason why do you want to ask the question? why do we come back? Because apparently the other dimensions, it's pretty groovy there. It's pretty groovy there. But here's the thing about those levels of dimensions. You don't get to taste chocolate mousse. You don't get to actually hold your lover's face in your hands and speak, the words, I adore you. Like that is why I say this existence is heaven on earth, because we came to experience and then upload and codify that experience back into some people call it the grid. I call it the labyrinth.
The question I always have is, how do people know this stuff? Like, how would you know? Because
it's not on the level of knowing, Bobby. So one of the reasons why there's such a push, and if you've read Stealing Fire by Jamie Wheel, any of these, or study Michael Pollan's work, like why we are moving towards, by the way, remembering and revisiting what indigenous culture did for centuries, plant medicine, is because we are wired to have experiences that open the trap door of our subconscious, which is our body, and our conscious. Because when we open the door into that 95%, we have access to our multidimensionality.
So people are discovering this through
plant medicine.
So by altering their state. Okay.
Altered states. And by the way, Timothy Leary did this in the 60s and 70s with LSD, and then shut it down because he was afraid. The story goes, afraid of what big government was going to do with this power. So there, you asking the question, is it true or not, is actually asking the question from a dimension of the mind that will never find validation for it, ever. It is completely embodied experience. So anybody who's had those experiences will be listening to this and be like, oh yeah, I actually felt some version of that when I opened up my subconscious, because that's what it's doing. That's what any of those.
Yeah, I imagine different people listening to this are going to have a very different response.
Yeah, they'll probably think I'm
to it.
They'll probably, yeah. Well, I got a long time ago. This was from one of my teachers, John DeMartini, and I love. It's like
he's been on the show.
I know,
yeah,
and I
love John.
He's
amazing,
just phenomenal. But one of the things he said, he's like, he learned a long time ago that a third, and he based this in sacred geometry actually, but a third of the room is going to love you, a third of the room is going to hate you, and a third of the room ain't going to care. And I'm like, that set me free. So a third of who's listening to this is going to be like, she's a quack. A third of it's going to be like, I resonate, and a third's going to be like,
that's a decent night on stage, to be fair.
Yeah, it's a total it's fun. It's like my telos, soul's originating intent is to be and the vessel for the light of the divine feminine, of her to come through on this planet. And it's not going to be for everyone. I've never been for everyone, ever. And
nobody is or should be. I think if anyone's for
exactly
everyone.
And when you are of lightning medicine, which I am, it could tweak. It's also going to potentially tweak someone, quote unquote, the wrong way. But to me, there's never a wrong way, because at any given moment, all I can stand in complete alignment to is my light that I bring forth, or that I am a vessel to have come through me, is about raising consciousness together. Simple. Always has been. Fitness industry, done.
That leads me to my last question.
Yes.
Because this is probably just a selfish question, but anyway, how do you know when you are living in alignment with your originating intention?
My soul's originating intention. That's a great question. Life is in this exquisite, I'll use an overused word, flow. Life shows up when I'm in that type of access, let's use the word effortlessly. Let's use the space. Let's use the word fulfilled, because ultimately, a woman might come to me and say, I want X, Y, and Z. But you peel back the onion on anybody's desires, which are from identity, yearnings are from the soul, wanting is from the identity. You peel back anybody's identity and their desires, you will get their soul and their yearnings. And what I have found in my experience, women yearn to feel free and full of rapture and
Rapture.
bliss.
What? Okay. So talk about that. When somebody feels free and full of rapture.
Having, which comes from them to themselves, the experience of full self-expression in a way that impacts and serves. And I mean, impacts with accountability, and serves herself as the embodied self she is as her soul. And by that very nature, you are the universe. Everybody gets impacted because they're the universe too. So like, we're all quote unquote in unity in one, not to use, again, overused words, but it is definitely in flow. And I have worked with billionaire, women who literally planes, cars, homes, blah, 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 all of it, to, more younger millennials who are want to be coaches. And I am telling you right now, and I could say this with as much love from my soul that I have, is the freedom to be fully in bliss and to experience this experience fully with hearts open, souls authentically aligned in this experience, loving love as a way of being. And then whoever gets to the recipient of that loving love, your life is magnificent. And that doesn't mean, and the illusion, and it just drives me bananas, the illusion that committing your life to being happy will create a happy life. And we don't have the time to go down that tunnel.
Yeah, but that is just complete bullshit on so many levels.
Because think about it, like back to my, Kuan Yin and my altar behind me and dropping to your knees. Some of the greatest moments of our lives are when we are on our knees, because we were blind, or we were not aware, and life will throw us dissension, I call them, moments, so that we can fully be here and experience it all. And if anybody got anything from our conversation today, if we could shift our relationship to breakdowns, to that which we call painful, to now, the new word is trauma and PTSD. And I acknowledge there are people, I've had my own PTSD that I've had to process. But if we can shift it to, those are the moments where we grow the most, where we anchor and build the most circuitry and neuroscaffolding to appreciate existence and the experience of existence even more, everything would shift.
So when we're most connected and integrated with who we are, not what we're doing, but who we're being, we're at our most resilient and by default in our greatest service to others.
I don't even know if resilience is even important in that state. I'm not, I'm very spiritual. I will walk into a mosque, a synagogue, a church. I love them all. Cause to me, I'm in the presence of something higher, no matter where I am. But when I call him the dude, when Jesus Christ was on the cross, story has it that he actually said, forgive them, God, they know not what they do. So I'm not going to get into like a religious, like whether you believe there's a God or that he existed, that's not important. But what I do know is at that frequency of story or who he was profound enough that we're still telling the story about it this many years later, right? So something had to have happened, whether it's something.
Point.
So, but to be in forgiveness, to be in, one could say he was resilient, but when you are in love with love, and that this is the experience of heaven on earth, you are in that level of consciousness, which is to aspire towards, then forgiveness is obvious. He was being killed in this story, or actually, and he could be in forgiveness. So, I'm not sure how resilient he was, but I do know he was in a state of consciousness to forgive anybody and anything in that moment. At least the story has it. So
thank you. No, thank you for that distinction.
I live inside of that the dimensions that are possible for us as spiritual beings having a spiritual experience are so juicy and delicious, and even with all the conflict and everything that's arising, which, by the way, there's been conflict and breakdowns throughout history. It's what has made us resilient. It is what has made us more anchored here in the human experience. So if we could treat everything with the level of wonder that we would, in holding a little baby, or holding the butterfly, or looking at a rose, if every moment could be as sacred. And to me, that's the spiritual person, is every moment, like cleaning the bathroom, making dinner for my kids. And, I'm not saying I'm great at this. Like, this is my spiritual school. Everything is my spiritual school. Making pancakes for my kids, being with you right now. Like, this is my opportunity for being in the temple.
For whatever it's worth, I enjoy being with you far more than I enjoy cleaning the bathroom. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And me, you too. But I was just trying to drive a point home that it's simpler than we try to make it. It's simpler than I tried to make it for a very long time, or long period in my life.
Sometimes really important things are that way. I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for chatting with me. I know we're probably going to chat a little bit more after this episode, but thank you.
Yeah. And just before you go, who you are and who you always have been is an absolute open-hearted, loving human. And I just want to thank you for the love that you bring through you, to this planet.
I appreciate that love
around you.
I really do.